The sand was still warm beneath her boots as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope one final time. At 5 feet 2 inches and 115 pounds, she had been told countless times that she was too small for this job. Too small for special forces. Too small for combat. Too small to make a difference. But as she peered through that scope at the enemy compound 800 meters away, watching 15 Marines pinned down by enemy fire, Maria knew that size had nothing to do with what she was about to do. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's journey to that moment began 12 years earlier, in a small town in New Mexico, where she first picked up a hunting rifle at age 16. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her to shoot, but even he never imagined that his daughter would one day become one of the most lethal snipers in military history. Growing up in a family where military service was considered an honor, Maria always knew she wanted to serve her country. But the path wasn't going to be easy. When Maria enlisted in the Marine Corps at 18, she stood barely over 5 feet tall and weighed less than most of the gear her male counterparts carried. The drill instructors took one look at her and shook their heads. "You sure you're in the right place, Tiny?" one of them asked during her first day at boot camp. But Maria had something that couldn't be measured in inches or pounds. She had an unwavering determination and a natural gift that would soon become legendary. Boot camp was brutal. While her fellow recruits struggled with the physical demands, Maria found herself excelling in unexpected ways. Her small frame, initially seen as a disadvantage, actually made her more agile and harder to spot. She could crawl through spaces that larger Marines couldn't navigate, and her lightweight build meant she could move silently across terrain that would give away heavier soldiers. But it was on the shooting range where Maria truly began to shine. First time she picked up a military rifle, something clicked. Her instructors watched in amazement as this petite young woman consistently hit targets that seasoned Marines struggled with. Her breathing was controlled, her stance was perfect, and her focus was absolute. Shot after shot, Maria's bullets found their mark with mechanical precision. It wasn't just good shooting, it was something special. "I've never seen anything like it," Gunnery Sergeant Williams later recalled. "This girl could thread a needle at 300 yards. We knew we had someone special on our hands." But even with her exceptional marksmanship skills, Maria faced constant skepticism from her superiors. The military in 2011 was still a male-dominated world, and the idea of a woman serving in combat roles was controversial. Many believed that women simply didn't belong on the front lines, regardless of their abilities. After completing boot camp with honors, Maria was assigned to a standard infantry unit, but she had bigger dreams. She wanted to be a sniper. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper program was one of the most elite and demanding training courses in the military. It had a failure rate of over 70%, and it had never graduated a female candidate. When Maria submitted her application, she was met with laughter and dismissal. "They told me I was wasting everyone's time," Maria remembered years later. "They said I should stick to support roles, maybe become a clerk or work in communications. But I knew what I was capable of, even if they didn't." Maria's commanding officer initially refused to sign off on her application, but her shooting scores were impossible to ignore. She had achieved perfect scores on every marksmanship test, and her performance in field exercises was consistently superior to her male counterparts. The breakthrough came during a training exercise in the Mojave Desert. Maria's unit was conducting a simulated combat mission when they encountered unexpected resistance from the opposing force. Pinned down by enemy fire, the unit's designated marksman was unable to locate the source of the incoming rounds. Maria, positioned on the unit's flank, quickly identified 3 enemy positions that had been hidden from the other Marines' view. Without hesitation, She began engaging the targets with her standard-issue rifle. One by one, she eliminated the opposing forces with surgical precision, allowing her unit to advance and complete their mission. The exercise controllers were stunned. Maria had single-handedly turned the tide of the battle, demonstrating not just exceptional marksmanship, but tactical awareness and decision-making skills that impressed even veteran officers. Captain James Morrison, who observed the exercise, immediately called Maria into his office. "Rodriguez," he said, "I'm recommending you for Scout Sniper School. I don't care what anyone else says. You've got the skills, and you've got the heart." It was the break Maria had been waiting for, but she knew the real challenge was just beginning. Scout Sniper program would test every aspect of her abilities. She would need to master advanced marksmanship techniques, learn to operate independently behind enemy lines, and develop the mental toughness required to take human lives in combat. For a 5'2" woman in a program designed for elite male warriors, the odds were stacked against her from day one. Scout Sniper School was everything Maria expected and more. Located at the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, the program was designed to break down candidates and rebuild them into precision. Weapons. The physical demands were intense, but Maria had prepared for that. What she hadn't anticipated was the psychological warfare that would come from being the only woman in a class of 32 highly motivated Marines. From the moment she arrived, Maria faced constant scrutiny. Her instructors, all seasoned combat veterans, made it clear that they believed she didn't belong there. "This isn't a game, Rodriguez," Staff Sergeant Thompson told her on the first day. "One mistake from you out there, and good Marines die. We can't afford to have someone who can't pull their weight." The message was clear. She would have to prove herself every single day. The curriculum was divided into 3 phases, each designed to test different aspects of a sniper's capabilities. Phase 1 focused on marksmanship fundamentals, where students learn to engage targets at distances up to 1,000 meters. Maria excelled in this phase, consistently outperforming her male classmates on the range. Her natural shooting ability, combined with her obsessive attention to detail, made her the top shooter in her class, but marksmanship was only part of the equation. Phase 2 introduced fieldcraft and stalking, where students learned to move unseen through hostile territory. This was where Maria's small stature became a significant advantage. While her larger classmates struggled to conceal themselves in the brush, Maria could disappear into terrain that seemed impossible to hide in. Her instructors began to take notice, though they were reluctant to admit it. She was like a ghost, recalled Sergeant Major Davis, one of the program's senior instructors. "We'd set up these stalking exercises where students had to get within 150 meters of our position without being spotted. Most of them failed miserably, but Rodriguez, she'd just vanish. We'd be looking right at her hiding spot and still couldn't find her." Maria's ability to remain hidden wasn't just about size, it was about patience, discipline, and an almost supernatural ability to read the terrain. The psychological pressure was relentless. Maria's classmates, while not openly hostile, made it clear that they didn't think she belonged. Comments about her size, her gender, and her capabilities were constant. Some tried to undermine her confidence by questioning whether she had the mental fortitude to kill another human being. "Can you really pull the trigger when it matters?" one classmate asked during a particularly intense training session. "When some terrorist has a gun pointed at your buddy's head, will you be able to do what needs to be done?" Maria's response was simple and direct: "Try me." But inside, she wondered the same thing. She had never taken a human life, and despite all her training, she couldn't be certain how she would react in that moment. It was a question that would haunt her throughout the program and beyond. Phase 3 focused on advanced tactics and real-world application. Students learned to work with spotters, coordinate with ground forces, and operate in urban environments. Maria thrived in these scenarios, demonstrating not just technical proficiency, but strategic thinking that impressed even her harshest critics. Her small size allowed her to set up shooting positions in places that larger snipers couldn't access, giving her tactical advantages that couldn't be taught. The final test came during a comprehensive field exercise that simulated a real combat mission. Students were inserted into a mock enemy territory and tasked with eliminating high-value targets while avoiding detection. It was a test of everything they had learned in marksmanship, fieldcraft, tactical thinking, and mental toughness. Maria was assigned one of the most challenging targets, a simulated enemy commander located in a heavily defended compound. For 3 days, Maria stalked her target, moving through hostile territory while avoiding enemy patrols. Her small frame allowed her to navigate through drainage culverts and tight spaces that would have been impossible for larger soldiers. She set up her final shooting position in an abandoned building, 600 meters from her target. The shot would be challenging. She would have to account for wind, elevation, and the movement of her target. As she settled into position, Maria felt a strange calm wash over her. All the doubts, all the criticism, all the questions about whether she belonged there faded away. There was only the rifle, the target, and the mission. She controlled her breathing, made her final adjustments, and squeezed the trigger. The simulated round struck the target center mass, eliminating the enemy commander and completing the mission. The exercise controllers were stunned. Maria had not only completed one of the most difficult scenarios in the program, but she had done it with a level of precision and professionalism that surpassed most of her male classmates. When she returned to the base, even her harshest critics had to acknowledge her abilities. Graduation day arrived with little fanfare. Of the 32 Marines who had started the program, only 18 remained. Maria was not just among them, she was the honor graduate, the top performer in one of the military's most elite training programs. As she received her Scout Sniper badge, she knew she had shattered a barrier that many believed could never be broken. But Maria's real test was yet to come. In 3 months, she would deploy to Afghanistan, where she would face the ultimate challenge of her training and her resolve. The Taliban didn't care about her size, her gender, or her graduation honors. They only cared about killing American soldiers, and Maria would have to prove that she could protect her fellow Marines in the most dangerous environment on Earth. Afghanistan in 2012 was a country in chaos. The Taliban had regrouped after their initial defeat, and American forces were facing increasingly sophisticated and deadly attacks. Maria's unit, the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, was deployed to Helmand Province, one of the most dangerous regions in the country. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, endless stretches of desert, punctuated by rocky outcroppings and small villages that could hide enemy fighters. Maria's first deployment was a shock to the system. Despite all her training, nothing could have prepared her for the reality of combat. The heat was overwhelming, often reaching 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. The gear was heavy, and the constant threat of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, made every patrol a potential death sentence. But for Maria, the biggest challenge wasn't the environment or the enemy. It was proving herself to a new group of Marines who had never worked with a female sniper. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, Maria's team leader, was initially skeptical. "I'd heard about this female sniper coming to our unit," he later recalled. "To be honest, I was worried. We were going into some of the heaviest fighting of the war, and I needed to know that everyone on my team could handle the pressure." Chen's concerns weren't about Maria's abilities. Her reputation from Scout Sniper School had preceded her. He was worried about how the other Marines would react and whether Maria could handle the psychological pressure of combat. The first few weeks were tense. Maria's squad included 8 other Marines, all combat veterans who had served multiple deployments. They were polite but distant, unsure how to interact with the only woman in their unit. Maria understood their hesitation. She was an unknown quantity in a job where trust could mean the difference between life and death. She knew she would have to earn their respect through actions, not words. The opportunity came during Maria's third week in country. Her squad was conducting a routine patrol through a village suspected of harboring Taliban fighters. The mission was straightforward: search the village, gather intelligence, and return to base. But as they approached the village outskirts, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through her scope, she could see fresh tire tracks leading to a compound that intelligence had marked as abandoned. The tracks were from a heavy vehicle, possibly a truck carrying weapons or fighters. More concerning, she could see movement in the building's upper windows, shadows that suggested armed personnel. The official intelligence was wrong, and Maria's squad was walking into a trap. "Sergeant Chun," Maria whispered into her radio, "we've got a problem. That compound isn't abandoned. I'm seeing movement, and there are fresh vehicle tracks leading to it." Chun trusted Maria's observations enough to halt the patrol and call for backup. It was a decision that probably saved lives. Within minutes, the compound erupted in gunfire as Taliban fighters opened fire on what they thought would be an unsuspecting American patrol. The ensuing firefight lasted for 3 hours. Maria's position on a nearby ridge gave her a clear view of the enemy positions, and she began systematically eliminating Taliban fighters who were trying to flank her squad. Her first kill was a Taliban sniper who had been targeting her fellow Marines from a rooftop 400 meters away. The shot was clean and precise, ending the threat before the enemy sniper could fire a single round. I watched Rodriguez take out that sniper, and I knew right then that we had something special, Chun remembered. She was calm, professional, and deadly accurate. More importantly, she had saved our lives by spotting that ambush before we walked into it. The firefight ended with 7 Taliban fighters dead and no American casualties. Maria had accounted for 4 of the enemy kills, including the sniper who had been the greatest threat to her squad. Word of Maria's performance spread quickly through the battalion. The quiet, diminutive sniper who had been viewed with skepticism was now being recognized as one of the most effective soldiers in the unit. Her squad members, who had initially kept their distance, began to view her as an essential part of their team. More importantly, they began to trust her judgment and rely on her skills. Over the following months, Maria participated in dozens of combat operations. She adapted to the harsh environment with remarkable resilience, and her shooting skills seemed to improve with each engagement. She developed an almost supernatural ability to read the battlefield, identifying threats that others missed and eliminating them before they could harm her fellow Marines. Her small stature, once seen as a weakness, became one of her greatest assets in the urban combat environment of Afghanistan. Maria's reputation began to spread beyond her immediate unit. Other Marine companies began requesting her support for their operations, particularly missions that required precision shooting in complex urban environments. She became known as the Ghost among Taliban fighters, who spoke in hushed tones about the American sniper, who could kill from impossible distances and disappear without a trace. But Maria's greatest test was yet to come. In 6 months, she would face a situation that would define her career and prove once and for all that courage, skill, and determination couldn't be measured in inches or pounds. The Taliban had planned an operation that would test every aspect of her training and push her to the absolute limits of her abilities. 15 Marines would owe their lives to the woman who had been told she was too small to make a difference. Stage was set for Maria's defining moment, a battle that would become legendary in Marine Corps history and prove that heroes come in all sizes. The intelligence briefing on March 15, 2013, should have been routine. Captain Williams stood before the assembled Marines of Alpha Company, pointing to a map of the Sangin district where they would be operating. The mission seemed straightforward, clear, a series of compounds suspected of being used as Taliban weapons caches and arrest any high-value targets found in the area. What the intelligence didn't reveal was that the Taliban had been preparing for this operation for weeks, setting up the most sophisticated ambush American forces had encountered in the region. Maria sat in the back of the briefing room, studying the terrain maps with the intensity that had become her trademark. Something about the mission felt wrong. The compounds were arranged in a way that created natural choke points, and the surrounding terrain offered perfect elevated positions for enemy snipers. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that this was a trap. "Sir," Maria raised her hand during the question period, "has anyone considered that this might be a deliberate setup? The positioning of these compounds creates a perfect kill zone, and there are multiple elevated positions that would give enemy snipers clear fields of fire." Captain Williams looked at the map again, but the intelligence officers dismissed her concerns. "The Taliban don't have the sophistication to set up that kind of coordinated ambush," one of them said dismissively. "They're just opportunistic fighters hiding weapons." Maria knew better. Over the past year, she had observed the Taliban's tactics evolving. They were no longer the disorganized fighters that American forces had initially encountered. They had learned to coordinate complex attacks, use terrain to their advantage, and exploit weaknesses in American tactics. The fact that intelligence was underestimating them was a dangerous mistake. The mission was scheduled for dawn the next morning. Maria spent the evening studying satellite imagery and preparing her equipment. She had requested permission to position herself on a ridge overlooking the target area, where she could provide overwatch for the ground forces. Her request was approved, though some officers questioned whether it was necessary. They were about to learn just how necessary it was. At 05:00 hours, Maria and her spotter, Lance Corporal David Kim, moved into position on Hill 394, a rocky outcropping that provided a commanding view of the target compounds. The climb was treacherous, requiring them to navigate loose shale and steep inclines while carrying their equipment. Maria's small frame was an advantage here. She could move quickly and quietly over terrain that would challenge larger soldiers. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, Maria settled into her shooting position. Through her scope, she could see Alpha Company moving toward the target compounds in standard formation. Everything appeared quiet, but Maria's instincts told her otherwise. She began systematically scanning the area, looking for any signs of enemy activity. What she found confirmed her worst fears. "Control, this is Ghost One," Maria whispered into her radio, using her operational call sign. "I've got movement in multiple positions. This is definitely an ambush. I count at least 12 enemy fighters in concealed positions, and I think there are more." The response from the command post was skeptical. "Ghost One, confirm your observations. Intelligence indicates the area should be clear of enemy activity." Maria's frustration was mounting. She could see Taliban fighters moving into position, setting up what appeared to be a sophisticated ambush. They had machine gun nests, sniper positions, and what looked like rocket-propelled grenade (RPG) teams. The American forces were walking into a slaughter, and nobody wanted to listen to her warnings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first shots came at 0630 hours, just as Alpha Company reached the first compound. The Taliban had waited until the Marines were in the perfect position, spread out, exposed, and with limited cover. Machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions, immediately pinning down the American forces. Within seconds, the carefully planned patrol had turned into a desperate fight for survival. Maria's scope was already trained on the first Taliban machine gun position. She had been tracking the gunner for several minutes, waiting for him to reveal himself. When he opened fire on the Marines below, Maria was ready. Her first shot took him down instantly, silencing the machine gun and giving the pinned Marines a chance to find cover, but the Taliban had planned for this. As soon as Maria fired, she drew return fire from multiple positions. Bullets struck the rocks around her position, sending shards of stone flying. "They know exactly where we are," Kim observed grimly. This was definitely planned. Maria was already moving, relocating to a secondary position that she had identified earlier. From her new position, Maria could see the full scope of the ambush. The Taliban had positioned fighters in a horseshoe formation around the compounds, creating interlocking fields of fire that made it nearly impossible for the Marines to advance or retreat. Even worse, she could see additional Taliban fighters moving to flank the American position. Alpha Company was surrounded, outgunned, and running out of options. "Control, this is Ghost 1. Alpha Company is pinned down and taking heavy casualties. I count at least 20 enemy fighters in prepared positions. They need immediate air support and reinforcements." The response was not what she wanted to hear. "Ghost 1, air support is 20 minutes out. You need to provide whatever assistance you can until then." 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Maria could see Marines being wounded, their calls for medic echoing across the battlefield. The Taliban fighters were methodically working their way closer to the pinned American forces, using covering fire to advance from position to position. If something didn't change soon, Alpha Company would be overrun. Maria made a decision that would define her career and her life. She was going to take on the entire Taliban force by herself. The mathematics of the situation were brutal and simple. 20 Taliban fighters in fortified positions versus 1 American sniper on a rocky ridge. In any conventional sense, the odds were impossible. But Maria Rodriguez had never been conventional, and she had advantages that the Taliban couldn't account for. She knew the terrain, she had superior equipment, and she possessed a level of marksmanship skill that bordered on the supernatural. "Kim, I need you to spot for me and keep track of my ammunition," Maria said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting below. "I'm going to start working these positions systematically. Call out targets of opportunity and keep me informed of friendly positions." Lance Corporal Kim nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They were the only thing standing between Alpha Company and complete annihilation. Maria's first target was a Taliban sniper positioned in a second-story window of the main compound. Through her scope, she could see him tracking American Marines, with his rifle, preparing to take a shot. The distance was 650 meters, and she had to account for wind, elevation, and the fact that her target was partially concealed. Maria controlled her breathing, made her final adjustments, and squeezed the trigger. The Taliban sniper dropped instantly, his rifle clattering to the ground. "One down," she whispered, already searching for her next target. A Taliban fighter was setting up an RPG position behind a low wall, preparing to engage the Marines with devastating effect. Maria's second shot caught him just as he was raising the weapon to his shoulder. The RPG round exploded harmlessly against the compound wall, eliminating a threat that could have killed multiple Marines. But the Taliban weren't passive targets. As soon as they realized they were being engaged by a sniper, they began trying to locate Maria's position. Automatic weapons fire raked the ridge where she was positioned, forcing her to move constantly to avoid being hit. Her small size was crucial here. She could quickly relocate between firing positions, while larger soldiers would have been pinned down. The third target was perhaps the most dangerous. A Taliban machine gunner had set up a position that was raking the Marines with devastating fire, preventing them from moving to better cover. The position was well protected, with only a small opening that gave Maria a shooting angle. She would have to thread her bullet through a gap no larger than a dinner plate. At a distance of over 700 meters, Maria steadied herself against a boulder, controlling her breathing as she had been taught. The wind was variable, gusting across the valley in unpredictable patterns. She had to time her shot perfectly, waiting for a lull in the wind and the exact moment when the gunner exposed himself. The shot was perfect, striking the gunner center mass and silencing another deadly threat. "Ghost 1, this is Alpha 6, came the voice of Captain Williams over the radio. "I don't know what you're doing up there, but keep it up. You're giving US a chance to reorganize." Maria could hear the relief in his voice, but she knew the battle was far from over. The Taliban still had the Marines surrounded, and reinforcements were still 15 minutes away. The fourth and fifth targets came in rapid succession. 2 Taliban fighters were attempting to flank the Marines from the left, moving through a drainage ditch that would have brought them within grenade range of the American position. Maria's shots were quick and precise, eliminating both threats before they could complete their maneuver. By now, the Taliban had realized they were facing a sniper of exceptional skill. They began coordinating their efforts to locate and eliminate Maria's position. Multiple fighters began firing at the ridge simultaneously, creating a devastating barrage that forced Maria to take shelter behind the largest rock she could find. The situation was becoming desperate. "Rodriguez, they're starting to concentrate fire on our position," Kim observed, ducking as bullets whined overhead. "We might need to displace to avoid being overrun." But Maria knew that moving would take time, and time was something the Marines below didn't have. She made the decision to stay and fight, regardless of the personal cost. The 6th target was a Taliban commander who was coordinating the assault on the American position. Maria had observed him directing other fighters and pointing out targets. Taking him out would disrupt the Taliban's coordination and buy the Marines precious time. The shot was challenging. The commander was partially concealed behind a wall, and Maria had only a small portion of his body visible. Maria's bullet found its mark, and the effect was immediate. The coordinated Taliban assault began to break down as fighters lost their central command. Some began to withdraw, while others continued fighting independently. The pressure on Alpha Company decreased noticeably, allowing the Marines to begin treating their wounded and reorganizing their defense. But the Taliban weren't finished. As Maria searched for her next target, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A group of Taliban fighters was moving through a covered position that would bring them directly behind the Marines. If they completed their maneuver, they would be able to attack Alpha Company from the rear, where the Marines had no cover or defensive positions. Maria realized that she was the only person who could see this threat developing. The Marines below were focused on the enemies in front of them and had no idea that death was approaching from behind. She had to act quickly, but the targets were at extreme range, over 800 meters, and moving through terrain that provided only brief shooting opportunities. This would be the most challenging shooting of her career, requiring precision and timing that would test every aspect of her training. But 15 Marines' lives depended on her ability to stop this flanking maneuver. Maria prepared for the shots that would define her legacy and prove once and for all that courage. Commies in all sizes, the flanking force consisted of 6 Taliban fighters moving through a narrow ravine that would bring them directly behind Alpha Company's position. Maria could see them through her scope, moving in single file and using the terrain to remain hidden from the Marines below. They were disciplined and well-trained, maintaining proper spacing and using hand signals to communicate. This wasn't a ragtag group of insurgents. These were experienced fighters who understood tactics and terrain. Maria's ammunition was running low. She had already fired 12 rounds, and she was down to her last magazine. Each shot had to count, not just for accuracy but for conservation of ammunition. She couldn't afford to miss, and she couldn't afford to waste rounds on targets that weren't immediate threats. The mathematics were brutal: 6 enemies, 8 rounds remaining. and the lives of 15 Marines hanging in the balance. The first fighter in the flanking group was the leader, identifiable by his more elaborate equipment, and the way the others followed his signals. Maria tracked him through her scope as he moved through the ravine, waiting for the perfect moment when he would be exposed and stationary. The shot would be at the extreme range of her weapon system, requiring her to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and the target's movement. The moment came when the leader paused to signal the others. Maria's shot was perfect, striking him center mass and dropping him instantly. The other fighters immediately went to ground, trying to locate the source of the sniper fire. But Maria was already tracking the second target, a fighter who was attempting to provide cover for the others. Her second shot found its mark, but the remaining 4 fighters were now fully alert and seeking cover. They began moving erratically, making themselves harder to target while continuing their advance toward the Marines' rear. Maria realized she would have to take risks to stop them, exposing herself to return fire in order to get clear shots. The third target was partially concealed behind a boulder, with only his shoulder and part of his head visible. It was a challenging shot that required precision beyond normal human capability. Maria's bullet caught him in the exposed shoulder, spinning him around and eliminating him as a threat. 3 down, 3 to go, and 5 rounds remaining. But the Taliban fighters had learned from their fallen comrades. The remaining 3 began using suppressive fire to cover their advance, forcing Maria to keep her head down while they moved closer to the Marines' position. She could hear Captain Williams on the radio, reporting that his men were taking fire from multiple directions and requesting immediate air support. "Air support is still 10 minutes out," came the response from headquarters. "Hold your position and continue to defend." 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours. Maria could see the remaining Taliban fighters getting closer to the Marines' position, and she knew that once they reached their objective, the battle would be over. Maria made a decision that went against every principle of sniper tactics she had been taught. Instead of remaining in a concealed position, she moved to an exposed location that would give her clear shots at the remaining fighters. It was incredibly dangerous. She would be visible to any enemy forces that spotted her, but it was the only way to save the Marines below from her new position. Maria could see all 3 remaining fighters clearly. They were less than 200 meters from the Marines' rear position, close enough to use grenades and automatic weapons with devastating effect. She had to stop them now, before they could complete their attack. The 4th shot was taken quickly, targeting a fighter who was preparing to throw a grenade. Maria's bullet caught him just as he was pulling the pin, and the grenade exploded harmlessly in the ravine. The 5th shot eliminated another fighter who was setting up a machine gun position. 2 down, 1 to go, and 3 rounds remaining. The last Taliban fighter was the most dangerous. He had reached a position where he could see the Marines' rear area, and he was preparing to engage them with an AK-47. Maria could see him raising his weapon, preparing to fire into the backs of the American soldiers. She had one chance to stop him. The shot was the most difficult of her career. The target was partially concealed, moving, and at extreme range. Maria had to account for wind, elevation, and the fact that her target was about to fire on American Marines. She controlled her breathing, made her final adjustments, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the fighter center mass, dropping him instantly and ending the flanking threat. Maria had eliminated all 6 fighters in the flanking force, saving Alpha Company from what would have been a devastating rear attack. But the main battle was still raging, and she could see more Taliban fighters moving into position. "Ghost 1, this is Alpha 6, Captain Williams' voice crackled over the radio. "I don't know how you're doing it, but you've saved our lives. We can see air support inbound now. Hold your position and continue to provide overwatch." Maria looked at her remaining ammunition, 2 rounds left, and wondered if it would be enough. The battle was entering its final phase, and Maria Rodriguez, The woman who had been told she was too small for special forces was about to write the final chapter of one of the most heroic actions in Marine Corps' history. The Taliban had thrown everything they had at Alpha Company, but they hadn't counted on the deadly precision of the Ghost. Watching over them from the ridge, the sound of approaching helicopters should have been a relief, but Maria knew the battle was far from over. Through her scope, she could see the Taliban fighters regrouping for what appeared to be a final assault on Alpha Company's position. They had taken heavy casualties from Maria's precision fire, but they still outnumbered the Marines and held tactical advantages in terms of cover and positioning. "Ghost 1, this is Falcon 6, came the voice of the helicopter pilot over the radio. "We're 2 minutes out. Can you provide target designation for close air support?" Maria surveyed the battlefield below, identifying the most critical enemy positions. With only 2 rounds remaining, she would have to make every shot count while simultaneously directing the incoming air support. The Taliban commander had learned from his losses. Instead of exposing his fighters to Maria's devastating sniper fire, he was keeping them in covered positions and preparing for a coordinated rush that would overwhelm the Marines through sheer numbers. Maria could see at least 8 fighters massing in a compound to the east, while another group was preparing to advance from the north. "Falcon 6, this is Ghost 1. I have multiple targets in the eastern compound. GRID, reference 41 SMD, 12,345, 67,890. Secondary target is the northern ridgeline. APPROCAS IB is near, y 300 meters north of the primary compound." Maria's voice was calm and professional, but inside she was calculating the impossible mathematics of the situation. Even with air support, the Taliban still had enough fighters to overrun the Marines if they executed their attack properly. First Apache helicopter appeared over the ridge, its 30mm cannon already searching for targets. Maria watched as the pilot oriented on her target designations, but she knew the helicopters would need time to assess the situation and engage effectively. Time that Alpha Company might not have. That's when Maria saw something that made her blood run cold. A Taliban fighter had emerged from a hidden position with an RPG, and he was taking aim at the lead helicopter. The pilot couldn't see the threat from his angle, and the RPG would be devastating if it found its mark. Maria had to act immediately, but the shot was at extreme range and her target was partially concealed. With her second-to-last round, Maria engaged the RPG gunner. The shot was perfect, striking him just as he was about to fire. The RPG round exploded harmlessly against the compound wall, and the helicopter continued its approach, unaware of how close it had come to disaster. But Maria's muzzle flash had revealed her position to the remaining Taliban fighters, and they immediately began concentrating fire on her location. "Kim, we need to move now," Maria shouted over the incoming fire. Bullets were striking all around their position, sending rock fragments flying. But as they prepared to displace, Maria saw something that stopped her cold. A group of Taliban fighters was making a final desperate charge toward Alpha Company's position, using the distraction of the helicopter attack to mask their approach. Maria had 1 round left, and at least 6 fighters were charging the Marines' position. It was an impossible situation that required an impossible choice. She could take one final shot and then watch helplessly as the remaining fighters overran her fellow Marines, or she could try something that had never been attempted in the history of modern warfare. Maria made a decision that would become the stuff of legend. Instead of targeting the fighters directly, she aimed for a pile of explosive materials she had observed in the compound where the Taliban had been staging their attack. It was a desperate gamble. If she missed, the Marines would be overrun. If she hit her target, the explosion might eliminate multiple threats simultaneously. The shot was the most difficult of her career. She was firing at a small target at extreme range while under heavy fire, with the lives of 15 Marines depending on her accuracy. Maria controlled her breathing one final time, made her final adjustments, and squeezed the trigger on her last round. The explosion was massive. Maria's bullet had struck a cache of Taliban explosives, creating a secondary blast that eliminated 4 of the charging fighters and disrupted the entire attack. The remaining Taliban fighters were stunned by the explosion and confused by the sudden loss of their comrades. The charge faltered, giving the Apache helicopters time to engage with their cannon fire, but Maria's ammunition was now completely expended. She had fired every round she carried, and the battle was still raging below. If the Taliban regrouped for another attack, she would be helpless to stop them. All she could do was watch and pray that the air support would be enough to save her. Fellow Marines, the Apache helicopters were now fully engaged, their 30mm cannons systematically destroying Taliban positions. Maria watched as the pilots worked with deadly precision, eliminating threats that had been pinning down Alpha Company for over an hour. The tide of battle was finally turning, but the cost had been enormous. "The Ghost One, this is Alpha 6, Captain." William's voice came over the radio. "We're finally able to move. I need you to maintain overwatch while we evacuate our wounded and consolidate our position." Maria wanted to help, but without ammunition, she was essentially defenseless. All she could do was observe and report enemy movements while the Marines below fought for their lives. As the helicopters continued their attack, Maria began to assess the full scope of what had happened. In the span of 90 minutes, she had engaged and eliminated 18 Taliban fighters, disrupted a sophisticated ambush, prevented a flanking maneuver that would have destroyed Alpha Company, and saved the lives of 15 Marines. It was a feat of marksmanship and courage that would become legendary in Marine Corps' history. But the battle wasn't over yet, and Maria knew that the most dangerous moments often came after the fighting seemed to be winding down. The immediate aftermath of the firefight was chaos. Smoke rose from the destroyed Taliban positions, and the acrid smell of cordite filled the air. Maria could see the Marines of Alpha Company beginning to move, treating their wounded and securing the area. Through her scope, she maintained overwatch, searching for any remaining threats while the helicopters continued their systematic destruction of enemy positions. "The Ghost One, this is Medevac 27, came a new voice over the radio. "We're inbound for casualty evacuation. Can you confirm the landing zone is secure?" Maria scanned the area around the proposed landing zone, looking for any signs of Taliban activity. The main force had been eliminated, but she knew that individual fighters might still be hiding in the rubble. "Medevac 27, this is Ghost One. Landing zone appears secure, but be advised there may be individual fighters still in the area. Recommend fast rope insertion to minimize exposure time." Maria's voice was hoarse from the stress and dehydration of the prolonged battle, but her mind remained sharp and focused. As the medical helicopter approached, Maria noticed movement in a building that should have been empty. A Taliban fighter emerged from the rubble, carrying an AK-47 and moving toward the landing zone. He was wounded and desperate, but still dangerous. Maria's heart sank as she realized she had no ammunition left to stop him. "Medevac 27. Abort approach. Armed fighter moving toward your landing zone." Maria's warning came just in time. The helicopter pilot pulled up sharply, avoiding what could have been a devastating attack. But now the wounded Marines couldn't be evacuated, and Maria felt helpless to protect them. Lance Corporal Kim had been observing the same threat. "Rodriguez, I've got a clear shot on that fighter. Should I take him?" Kim was a competent soldier, but he wasn't a trained sniper. The shot would be challenging, and a miss might alert other hidden fighters to their position. "Take the shot," Maria ordered. "But make it count. We can't afford to reveal our position for a miss." Kim steadied his rifle, took careful aim, and fired. The shot was good, striking the Taliban fighter and eliminating the threat to the medical helicopter. The landing zone was secure, and the wounded Marines could finally be evacuated. As the medical helicopter touched down, Maria watched the Marines loading their wounded comrades. She could see the relief on their faces, but also the exhaustion that comes after surviving a life-threatening battle. These men had been through hell, and they had only survived because of the actions of one small woman on a distant ridge. Ghost 1, this is Alpha 6. Captain Williams' voice came over the radio. I need you to know that what you did today saved all of our lives. I've never seen anything like it in 15 years of combat. You eliminated 18 confirmed enemy fighters and disrupted a coordinated ambush that would have killed every man in my company. Maria felt a strange mixture of pride and exhaustion. She had accomplished something that would be remembered in Marine Corps' history, but the cost had been enormous. She had taken 18 lives, each one a human being with family and dreams. The weight of those deaths would stay with her for the rest of her life. The extraction helicopter arrived 30 minutes later. As Maria and Kim were winched up from the ridge, she could see the full scope of the battlefield below. The Taliban compound was in ruins, destroyed by the combination of her sniper fire and the Apache helicopter's cannon fire. Bodies were scattered across the landscape, testament to the deadly precision of modern warfare. Back at the forward operating base, Maria was debriefed by intelligence officers who could barely believe what they were hearing. She had engaged targets at ranges up to 800 meters, eliminated a flanking force single-handedly, and prevented the complete destruction of a Marine company. The intelligence officers who had dismissed her warnings about the ambush were notably absent from the debriefing. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the battalion commander, said during the debriefing, "What you accomplished today goes beyond exceptional. You saved 15 lives through skill, courage, and determination. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star, and I suspect it won't be the last award you receive for this action." Maria's response was characteristically modest. "Sir, I was just doing my job. Those Marines are my brothers, and I couldn't let them die when I had the ability to help them." But everyone in the room knew that what Maria had done went far beyond just doing her job. She had accomplished something that would be studied in military academies for generations. The news of Maria's actions spread quickly through the Marine Corps. The woman who had been told she was too small for special forces had just completed one of the most successful sniper actions in military history. Her accuracy rate was perfect: 18 shots, 18 kills, with no collateral damage or friendly fire incidents. But for Maria, the most important recognition came from the Marines she had saved. Over the following days, each member of Alpha Company sought her out to express their gratitude. These battle-hardened veterans, men who had initially been skeptical of serving with a female sniper, now spoke of her with reverence and respect. "She saved my life," Corporal Martinez told a reporter later. "I was pinned down by that machine gun, and I thought I was going to die. Then I heard that shot, and the firing stopped. I looked up and saw that the gunner was down. Rodriguez had taken him out from 700 meters away. I owe her everything." The transformation in how Maria was perceived was complete. She was no longer the small woman who didn't belong in special forces. She was the ghost, the Marine who had achieved the impossible and saved the lives of 15 of her fellow warriors. The weeks following the battle were a whirlwind of activity for Maria. Military journalists wanted to interview her. Officers from across the Marine Corps came to meet the legendary sniper, and her story began to spread beyond the military to the general public. But Maria remained focused on her mission and her fellow Marines, uncomfortable with the attention and more interested in preparing for the next operation. The Taliban, meanwhile, had learned a harsh lesson about underestimating American forces. Intelligence reports indicated that they had placed a bounty on Maria's head, recognizing her as a significant threat to their operations. The woman they had once dismissed as just another American soldier was now one of their most wanted targets. Colonel James Peterson, the regimental commander, called Maria to his office 2 weeks after the battle. "Rodriguez, I've received your Silver Star recommendation, and it's going to be approved. But I want to talk to you about something else. Command is considering pulling you out of Afghanistan and sending you back to the States. Your actions have made you a high-value target, and they're concerned about your safety." Maria's response was immediate and firm. "Sir, with respect, I didn't come here to be safe. I came here to fight alongside my fellow Marines. If I go home now, I'm abandoning the mission and the men who depend on me. I request to remain with my unit and continue serving in my current capacity." Colonel Peterson smiled. He had expected this response from Maria, but he had to make the offer. "I figured you'd say that. But understand that the Taliban are actively hunting you now. They know about the ghost, and they're going to do everything they can to eliminate you. Are you prepared for that level of threat?" Maria's answer was simple. "Sir, they can try." But she understood the gravity of the situation. The Taliban had suffered a significant defeat, and they would be looking for revenge. She would have to be more careful, more aware, and more prepared than ever before. The intelligence proved accurate. Over the following months, Maria's unit encountered increasingly sophisticated attempts to locate and eliminate her. The Taliban had brought in their own snipers, trained fighters whose mission was specifically to hunt the ghost. It became a deadly game of cat and mouse, with both sides using all their skills to outmaneuver the other. Maria's first encounter with a Taliban sniper came during a routine patrol 3 weeks after the battle. She was providing overwatch for a convoy when she noticed the unmistakable glint of a rifle scope in a building 600 meters away. The Taliban sniper was good, well-trained and disciplined, but he had made the mistake of revealing his position to someone better. The duel lasted less than 10 seconds. Maria spotted the enemy sniper, acquired the target, and fired before he could get off a shot. It was a clean kill at extreme range, demonstrating that her skills had not diminished despite the constant pressure she was under. But it also confirmed that the Taliban were serious about eliminating her. The second encounter was more dangerous. Maria was in a forward observation post when she realized that she was being stalked by a Taliban sniper team. They had positioned themselves to observe her likely shooting positions and were waiting for her to reveal herself. It was a sophisticated trap that required all of Maria's training and instincts to escape. Instead of taking the obvious shooting position, Maria moved to an unexpected location and waited. When the Taliban snipers revealed themselves, expecting to ambush her in the primary position, Maria was ready. She eliminated both snipers with quick, precise shots, ending another threat to American forces. These encounters only enhanced Maria's reputation. She was not just an exceptional sniper. She was a sniper hunter, capable of defeating the enemy's best marksman in direct combat. The Taliban bounty on her head increased, but so did the respect and admiration of her fellow Marines. Staff Sergeant Chen, who had initially been skeptical of Maria's abilities, became one of her strongest supporters. "I've served with some of the best Marines in the Corps," he told a visiting general, "but I've never seen anyone like Rodriguez. She's not just a great sniper. She's a force multiplier who makes everyone around her better and safer." The general had come to observe Maria in action, curious about the Marine who had become legendary throughout the military. He spent 3 days with her unit, watching her work and talking to the Marines who served with her. What he found was a professional soldier who had earned the complete trust and respect of her peers through competence, courage, and dedication. "Rodriguez represents the best of what the Marine Corps can be," the general wrote in his report. "She has shattered barriers not through politics or social pressure, but through superior performance and unwavering commitment to her fellow Marines. She is a credit to the Corps and an inspiration to all who serve with her." But Maria's greatest test was yet to come. Intelligence reports indicated that the Taliban were planning a major offensive designed specifically to draw her into a trap. They had studied her tactics, learned from their defeats, and were preparing something that would test every aspect of her training and resolve. The stage was set for Maria's final confrontation with the Taliban, a battle that would determine whether the woman who had been told she was too small for special forces could continue to protect her fellow Marines against an enemy that had made her elimination their top priority. The intelligence briefing on September 12, 2013, was different from any Maria had attended before. The Taliban had been quiet for weeks, avoiding contact with American forces and seemingly waiting for something. What they were waiting for, according to intercepted communications, was the perfect opportunity to eliminate the ghost once and for all. "They've been studying your tactics, Rodriguez," the intelligence officer explained, pointing to a map of the region. "They know your preferred shooting positions, your movement patterns, and your response times. They're planning something big, and you're the primary target." The briefing detailed a sophisticated Taliban operation designed to lure Maria into a trap while simultaneously attacking multiple American positions. Maria studied the intelligence with her characteristic intensity. The Taliban plan was clever and well coordinated. They would stage attacks on American positions that would require sniper support, drawing Maria into predetermined locations where they had prepared ambushes. It was a multi-layered trap that showed how much they had learned from their previous defeats. "Sir, I recommend that we use their plan against them," Maria said during the planning session. "If they're expecting me to respond in a predictable way, let's give them what they expect while being ready for their countermoves. We can turn their trap into our advantage." It was a risky strategy, but one that could eliminate the Taliban threat once and for all. The plan was approved, and Maria spent the next week preparing for what would likely be her most dangerous mission. She studied the terrain, identified alternative shooting positions, and coordinated with friendly forces to ensure she would have support when needed. But she also knew that ultimately, she would be facing the Taliban's best fighters alone. Operation began at dawn on September 19th. As expected, Taliban forces launched coordinated attacks on 3 American positions, creating the exact scenario that would normally require Maria's immediate response. But instead of moving to the obvious shooting positions, Maria had positioned herself in a location that gave her overwatch of the Taliban ambush sites. Through her scope, she could see Taliban snipers and fighters positioned in the locations where they expected her to appear. It was a sophisticated ambush with multiple layers of security and overlapping fields of fire. If she had followed her normal tactics, she would have walked directly into a trap that would have been impossible to escape. Instead, Maria began systematically eliminating the Taliban fighters who were waiting to ambush her. Her first target was a sniper positioned 800 meters away, hidden in a building that overlooked her normal shooting position. The shot was perfect, eliminating the threat before he even knew he was in danger. The second target was a machine gun team that had been positioned to cut off her escape route. Maria's shot silenced the machine gun and created confusion among the Taliban fighters, who couldn't understand how their ambush was being turned against them. They had planned for every contingency except facing an opponent who was better than they were. But the Taliban had learned from their previous encounters with Maria. As soon as they realized their ambush had failed, they began moving to secondary positions, trying to locate and eliminate her before she could do more damage. It became a deadly game of hide and seek, with both sides using all their skills to outmaneuver the other. Maria's third target was the Taliban commander coordinating the operation. She had been observing him through her scope, watching as he directed his fighters and adjusted their positions. Eliminating him would disrupt the entire operation and save American lives. The shot was challenging, requiring her to engage a moving target at extreme range while under fire from multiple positions. The bullet found its mark, and the Taliban operation immediately began to fall apart. Without central coordination, the fighters began to withdraw or operate independently, making them easier targets for American forces. Maria had once again demonstrated that superior training and skill could overcome numerical disadvantage, but the Taliban had one final surprise. A fighter who had been positioned specifically to target Maria had remained hidden during the entire engagement, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Maria was observing the withdrawal of enemy forces, he emerged from concealment and took aim at her position. The shot came closer than any Maria had experienced in her career. The bullet struck the rock inches from her head, sending stone fragments flying. She immediately rolled to a new position, searching for the source of the shot while trying to avoid follow-up fire. The Taliban sniper was good, well-trained, and patient, but he had made the mistake of revealing his position to someone better. Maria's return shot was instantaneous and precise. The Taliban sniper dropped immediately, ending the final threat of the operation. She had once again proven that courage, skill, and determination could overcome any obstacle, regardless of size or gender. The aftermath of the operation was swift and decisive. The Taliban forces in the region were decimated, their leadership eliminated, and their ability to conduct coordinated operations destroyed. Maria had not just survived their trap. She had turned it into their destruction. As Maria prepared to return to base, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been told she was too small for special forces, too weak for combat, and too different to succeed. Instead, she had become one of the most successful snipers in military history, saving dozens of lives and proving that heroism comes in all sizes. The woman who had been dismissed as too small had become a legend, and her story would inspire generations of Marines who would follow in her footsteps. Maria Rodriguez had proven that with courage, skill, and determination, no obstacle is insurmountable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.